I want to introduce to you the Solomon's Temple. We've moved from the tabernacle, and we've seen how that at Shiloh, that the tabernacle is starting to be permanent. There was actually a stone wall to that tabernacle at Shiloh. And now David has taken the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle, and he's moved it to Jerusalem. But he feels guilty as he looks out his window at that magnificent tent upon Mount Moriah. The period of Israel's portable temple, the tabernacle, lasted 440 years until the permanent structure was erected in Jerusalem. Even after the children of Israel entered into the promised land, the tabernacle continued to wander and was stationed in Gilgal and Shiloh and Nob and Gibeon. King David had desired to build the temple of Yahweh, the house of the living Elohim. After David was settled in his palace, he said to Nathan the prophet, "Here I am living in a palace of cedar, while the ark of the covenant of Yahweh is under a tent." Nathan replied to David, "Whatever you have in mind, do it, for Elohim is with you." 1 Chronicles 17, 1 through 2. And that's true. Yahweh was with David. David was a man after Yahweh's own heart. But you cannot presuppose, just because a man is anointed, that he's anointed to do a certain thing. You must inquire of Yahweh. Nathan was wrong to encourage David. He had not gone to Yahweh and received the word whether David could or could not build the temple. He assumed David could build the temple because David was with Yahweh and Yahweh was with David. But listen to what it says. That night the word of Elohim came to Nathan, saying, "Go and tell my servant David, this is what Yahweh says." Not what Nathan says, but what Yahweh says. "You are not the one to build me a house to dwell in. I have not dwelt in a house from the day I brought Israel up out of Egypt to this day. I have moved from one tent site to another, from one dwelling place to another. Wherever I have moved with all the Israelites, did I ever say to any of the leaders whom I commanded to shepherd my people, 'Why have you not built me a house of cedar?'" 1 Chronicles 17, 3 through 6. "I declared to you that Yahweh will build a house for you." Notice what it says. Yahweh will build a house for you. Not for himself, but for you. "When your days are over and you go to be with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, one of your own sons, and I will establish his kingdom. He's the one who will build a house for me, and I will establish his throne forever. I'll be his father, and he'll be my son. I will never take my love away from him as I took it away from your predecessor." Who was his predecessor? Shaul. "And I will set him over my house and my kingdom forever. His throne will be established forever." 1 Chronicles 17, 10 through 4. But notice who's going to build this house. Yahweh said, "I'll build a house for you." Now, where is this house going to be built? On the threshing floor. On the very spot that Abraham offered up Isaac. Abraham had built an altar to sacrifice Isaac in Genesis 22 and 2. So Abraham called that place Yahweh Yireh. Yahweh stares at this place. And to this day it is said, "On the mountain of Yahweh it will be provided." Genesis 22 and 14. The very place where Jacob saw the stairway to heaven. Jacob had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of El are ascending and descending on it. He thought, surely Yahweh is in this place. He called that place Beit El, though the city used to be called Luz, the almond tree, the tree of life. Genesis 28, 12, 16, and 19. Yahweh said, I am the El of Beit El, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. In Genesis 31, 13. David, though he was a man after Yahweh's own heart, committed a great sin. He stole a man's wife, and to cover it up, he murdered the man. Oh, he didn't have the blood on his hands, literally. But he was bloody nonetheless in this crime. Because he sent a man, Uzziah, the Hittite, that had converted to the Elohim of Isaac, of Abraham, of Jacob. And he had squandered that man's loyalty to himself. And he put him in the heat of the battle, and then he told his men to retreat, leaving Uzziah all alone. And he was decimated. So David could have his wife. He was out of the way. But Yahweh brought judgment. When the angel stretched out his hand to destroy Jerusalem, Yahweh was grieved because of the calamity and said to the angel who was afflicting the people, Enough! Withdraw your hand. And the angel of Yahweh was then at the threshing floor of Araunah, the Jebusite. Now this threshing floor is special. It's the place of Beit El. David too is in deep grief over the suffering and the death. He holds himself personally responsible, and he was. When David saw the angel who was striking down the people, he said to Yahweh, I'm the one who has sinned and done wrong. These are but sheep. What have they done? Let your hand fall upon me and my family. 2 Samuel 24 and 17. Oh, it will, David. It will. Yahweh answers David's anguished prayer. And he sends God and tells him, Go up and build an altar to Yahweh on the threshing floor of Araunah, the Jebusite. 2 Samuel 24:18. When David climbs the hill, he sees Araunah there, who prostrates himself before the king. And then David explains his errand. To buy your threshing floor, David answered, so I can build an altar to Yahweh, that the plague on the people may be stopped. And Araunah said to David, Let my lord the king take whatever he pleases him and offer it up. Here are oxen for burnt offering. Here are threshing sledges and ox yokes for the wood. O king, Araunah gives all this to the king. 2 Samuel 24, 21 through 23. And God came that day to David and said to him, Go up, erect an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. And David built there an altar unto Yahweh and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. So Yahweh heeded the prayers for the land, and the plague was withdrawn from Israel. 2 Samuel 24, 15, 16, 18, and 25. Through this act, he effectively laid the foundations for the holy temple in Jerusalem. So you can see on this horizon the topography of Jerusalem. Here's the Mount of Olives, at the place of the skull where Yeshua was crucified. Here is Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount. And you can see how they put filler in there to level out that hillside. On up is Mount Sion, really the same mountain. And that's why often this is all called Mount Sion. But on the top of Mount Sion was the palace. How David could look down and see that Yahweh was living in a tent. This is the Kidron Valley, that one day we'll see the massacre of the nations. Here is what archaeology has shown us. And this is what we're concerned with right here. These walls, retaining walls, were built, and this is what is today called the Wailing Wall. It's not any part of the temple, it's part of the retaining wall. So what did David do concerning the temple? He couldn't just stand idly by. His passion for this house was too great. And so David commanded to gather together the aliens who were in the land of Israel. And he set stone cutters to prepare dressing stones for building the house of Elohim. David also provided great stores of iron for nails, for the doors of the gates, and for the clamps, as well as the bronze in quantities beyond weighing, and cedar timbers without number. For the Sidonians and the Tyrians brought great quantities of cedar to David. For David said, Solomon my son is young and inexperienced, and the house that is to be built for Yahweh must be exceedingly magnificent, of fame and glory throughout all the lands. I will therefore make preparations for it. So David provided materials in great quantity before his death. Then he called for Solomon his son and charged him to build a house for Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel. David said to Solomon, My son, I had it in my heart to build a house to the name of Yahweh, my Elohim. But the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, You have shed much blood and have waged great wars. You shall not build a house to my name, because you have shed so much blood before me upon the earth. Behold, a son shall be born to you. He shall be a man of peace. He will give him peace from all of his enemies round about, for his name shall be called Solomon. And I'll give peace and quiet to Israel in his days. Shlomo, in Hebrew is his name. Shlomo is the personification of shalom. So Solomon is literally the man of peace. I'll give him peace from all his enemies round about, for his name shall be Solomon, and I will give peace and quiet to Israel in his days. He shall build a house for my name. He shall be my son, and I'll be his father. I will establish his royal throne in Israel forever. Now, my son, Yahweh be with you, so that you may succeed in building the house of Yahweh your Elohim, as he has spoken concerning you. Only may Yahweh grant you discretion and understanding, that when he gives you charge over Israel, you may keep the law of Yahweh your Elohim. Then you'll prosper if you are careful to observe the statutes and the ordinances which Yahweh commanded Moses for Israel. Be strong and of good courage. Fear not, be not dismayed. With great pains I have provided for the house of Yahweh 100,000 talents of gold, 1,000,000 talents of silver, of bronze and iron beyond weighing, for there is so much of it. Timber and stone too I have provided. To these you must add, you have an abundance of workmen, stone cutters, masons, carpenters, and all kinds of craftsmen without number, skilled in working gold, silver, bronze, and iron. Arise and be doing. Yahweh be with you. David also commanded all the leaders of Israel to help Solomon his son, saying, Is not Yahweh your Elohim with you? And has he not given you peace on every side? For he has delivered the inhabitants of the land into my hand. And the land is subdued before Yahweh and his people. Now set your mind and heart to seek Yahweh your Elohim. Arise and build the sanctuary of Yahweh Elohim, so that the ark of the covenant of Yahweh and the holy vessels of Elohim may be brought into a house built for the name of Yahweh. 1 Chronicles 22. David provided Solomon with a large amount of gold and silver with which to build the temple. The biblical account reports that this amounted to 100,000 talents. That's 3 tons of gold, an amount exceeding the current annual global production. And 1,000,000 talents, or 30 tons of silver. 3,000 tons of gold, more than what's produced in the world today annually. It's amazing. King David's son Solomon received the instruction from his father for every detail of the temple's construction. All of this information was based on prophetic insight that David had received, handed down to him from previous generations. Indeed, the sages of Israel teach that a temple scroll had been given to Moses by Yahweh and handed down in every generation. This document was a divinely ordained plan that contained the details, drawings, and diagrams for the temple and its vessels, including variations and innovations that could be made to suit the changing needs of a growing nation. Now, we know that Yahweh gave a tabnith, a pattern, to Moses. And we know that Moses wrote this down. It's not in the Torah, But the sages said it was written in the scroll, the temple scroll. That's how Solomon was able to take the tabernacle and enlarge in it by scale to build the temple. Essentially, Solomon's temple was similar to the tabernacle of the desert in its basic layout and design, only on a larger scale. Solomon increased the number of sacred vessels in use. In fact, he took the tabernacle vessels and stored those away underneath the Temple Mount in the tunnels there. So he could make grander vessels according to the pattern of the tabernacle. So he increased the number of sacred vessels in use according to the needs of Israel and the enlarged size of the temple. For example, he built not one menorah, but 10, as well as 10 lavers and tables. He also constructed vessels which were unique to this temple. He made special carts which transported the lavers from place to place within the temple. The brazen sea, a large reservoir of water resting on 12 oxen, was one of the wonders of the ancient world. This water was used by the priests to purify themselves before attending to their sacred duties. The twin sculptured pillars, Jachin and Boaz, judgment and mercy, were also a hallmark of the unique edifice built by King Solomon. Keep in mind that everything about the tabernacle was portable, including its foundation. So what then was the tabernacle's foundation? 100 sockets of silver, and these were placed on only 3 sides. On the south, 40 sockets, according to Exodus 36, 23, and 24. And on the north, another 40, according to Exodus 36, 25, and 26. But on the west side, according to Exodus 36, 27, the short side of the rectangular foundation, only 16 sockets were needed. This totals 96 silver sockets. What about the other 4? That's where it gets interesting. They were placed between the Holy of Holies and the holy place, according to verse 36. For what purpose? To sustain the poles for the paroquet, the veil, a very special dividing curtain separating the 2 holy rooms, the holy place and the Holy of Holies. A description of the curtain is given in Exodus 36:35. Hence, the total number of silver sockets was 100. 1 socket from each talent of donated silver, according to Exodus 38:27. To complete the rectangular foundation, another 5 sockets were placed on the eastern side, the entrance, but these are of bronze or copper. Exodus 38:38, 36:38, not silver, as shown above. The silver sockets on the south, the north, and the west side formed a horseshoe-like foundation on 3 sides of the tabernacle, as did the priestly cells of the temple. Also compare the tabernacle and the temple, and notice how the 4 silver sockets of the dividing curtain correlate with the priestly cells that form the shoulders of the temple man. The temple had 90 priestly cells correlating to the pattern of the tabernacle of the silver sockets. 1 Chronicles 29:4. This also implies that the tabernacle's gold-plated wooden frame in Exodus 26:29 relates to the temple's gold-plated walls. The temple's foundation was of limestone blocks, not silver. The temple was also in the hidden form of a high priest. And by law, all priests were of the tribe of Levi in Malachi 3:3. Yahweh rebukes the priesthood, saying that he will purify the sons of Levi of corruption and refine them as gold and silver. Since the central portion of the tabernacle's interior was gold-plated, it is perfectly fitting that its cell walls should be silver-plated, symbolizing the priests themselves becoming as gold and silver by attaining inward attributes of holiness after being purged of moral corruption. King Solomon requested the aid of King Hiram of Tyre to provide both the quality materials and skilled craftsmen. During the construction, a special inner room, named in Hebrew the Kodesh HaKodeshim, the Holy of Holies, was prepared to receive and house the Ark of the Covenant, says 1 Kings 6:19. And when the temple was dedicated, the ark containing the sapphire cubes of the commandments was placed therein, according to 1 Kings 8:6-9. Then King Solomon raised up a labor force out of all of Israel, and the labor force was 30,000 men. Solomon selected 70,000 men to bear burdens, 80,000 to quarry stones in the mountains, and 3,600 to oversee them. 1 Kings 5:13 and 2 Chronicles 2:2. In the 418th year after the people of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziv, which is the sacred month, he began to build the house of Yahweh. The house which King Solomon built for Yahweh was 60 cubits long, 20 cubits high, and 30 cubits wide. 20 cubits wide and 30 cubits high. The vestibule in the front of the nave of the house was 20 cubits long, equal to the width of the house, and 10 cubits deep in front of the house. And he made for the house windows with recessed frames. Now this is interesting. Normally, how do you build a window? You build it with the wide part on the outside so that it can let in all the most light, right? But in this case, it was reversed, because we're not trying to let light in, we want light to get out, the glory of Yahweh. And so this had recessed windows. He also built a structure against the walls of the house, running round the walls of the house, both the nave and the inner sanctuary, and he made side chambers all around. The lowest story was 5 cubits broad, the middle one was 6 cubits broad, and the third was 7 cubits broad. For around the outside of the house he made offsets on the wall, in order that the supporting beams should not be inserted into the walls of the house. When the house was built, it was with stone prepared at a quarry, so that neither hammer nor axe nor any tool of iron was heard in the temple while it was being built. The entrance for the lowest story was on the south side of the house, and one went up by stairs to the middle story, and from the middle story to the third. So he built the house and finished it, and he made the ceiling of the house beams and planks of cedar. He built the structure against the whole house, each story 5 cubits high, and it was joined to the house with timbers of cedar. Now the word of Yahweh came to Solomon concerning this house which you're building. If you will walk in my statutes and obey my ordinances and keep all my commandments and walk in them, then I will establish my word with you, which I spoke to David your father. And I will dwell among the children of Israel, and will not forsake my people Israel. So Solomon built the house and finished it. He lined the walls of the house on the inside with boards of cedar. From the floor of the house to the altar, the rafters of the ceiling, he covered them on the inside with wood, and he covered the wood of the house with boards of cypress. He built 20 cubits of the rear of the house with boards of cedar from the floor of the rafters. And he built this within as an inner sanctuary, as the most holy place. The house, that is, the nave in the front of the inner sanctuary, was 40 cubits long. The cedar within the house was carved in the form of gourds and open flowers. All was cedar, no stone was seen. The inner sanctuary he prepared in the innermost part of the house, to set there the ark of the covenant of Yahweh. The inner sanctuary was 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 20 cubits high. And he overlaid it with pure gold. He also made an altar of cedar. And Solomon overlaid the inside of the house with pure gold. And he drew chains of gold across in front of the inner sanctuary and overlaid it with gold. And he overlaid the whole house with gold until all the house was finished. Also the whole altar that belonged to the inner sanctuary he overlaid it with gold. And the inner sanctuary he made 2 cherubim, or guardian ones, of olive wood, each 10 cubits high. 5 cubits was the length of one of the wings of the cherub, and 5 cubits the length of the other wing of the cherub. It was 10 cubits from the tip of one wing to the tip of the other. The other cherub was measured 10 cubits. Both cherubim had the same measure and the same form. The height of one cherub was 10 cubits, and so was that of the other cherub. He put the cherubim in the inner part of the house, and the wings of the cherubim were spread out so that the wing of one touched the one wall, and the wing of the other keruv touched this other wall. Their other wings touched each other in the middle of the house, and he overlaid the cherubim with gold. He carved all the walls of the house round about with carved figures of cherubim and palm trees and open flowers. And the inner and the outer rooms, the floor of the house, he overlaid with gold in the inner and the outer rooms. For the entrance to the inner sanctuary, he made the doors of olive wood. The lintel and the doorposts formed a pentagon. He covered the two doors of the olive wood with the carvings of the cherubim, palm trees and open flowers. And he overlaid them with gold and spread gold upon the cherubim and upon the palm trees. So also he made for the entrance to the nave doorposts of the olive wood in the form of a square, and two doors of cypress wood. The two leaves of the one door were folding, and the two leaves of the other door was folding. On them he carved cherubim and palm trees and open flowers, and he overlaid them with gold, evenly applied upon the carved work. He built the inner court with 3 courses of hewn stone and 1 course of cedar beams. In the 4th year, the foundation of the house of Yahweh was laid in the month of Ziv. And in the 11th year, in the month of Bul, which is the 8th month, the house was finished in all of its parts. And according to all specifications, he was 7 years in building it. It says 1 Kings 6. Now it's interesting, because when they built that Holy of Holies, they couldn't see in there, or they'd be struck dead. So how did they do the mason work inside? What the sages say, the careful boxes were made, suspended with golden chains, and they brought them and laid them through the windows and lowered them down into the Holy of Holies with blinders on each side of their head so they couldn't see the Ark of the Covenant. And that's how they repaired the masonry work in the Holy of Holies. What did Solomon say? He said, I intend therefore to build a temple for the name of Yahweh my Elohim, as Yahweh told my father David when he said, your son whom I will put on the throne in your place will build the temple for my name. 1 Kings 5:5. I think it's unique how Yahweh says, I want you to build a temple for my name. What's his name? Yahweh. Richard, when you've been doing the work around this place, you're doing it under Yahweh, because this is where Yahweh's put his name. The feature that sets apart the Temple of Solomon from other temples in the ancient world is that there was no idol in it. It contained only the mercy seat over the ark and the cherubim overshadowing the mercy seat. This declared to the world that idols are unnecessary for Yahweh to be present. The Elohim of Israel was not localized in any sense. Neither was he bound to any other form, such as the ark. The temple, therefore, was not necessary because of Yahweh's nature. He did not need it. 1,000 years later, the Nazarene martyr Stephen said to an unruly crowd, Solomon built Yahweh a house. However, the Most High does not dwell in temples made with hands. As the prophet said, heaven is my throne, the earth is my footstool. What house will you build for me, says Yahweh, or what place of my rest? Has not my hand made all these things? Acts 7:47 and 50. He was quoting Isaiah 66, 1 through 2. The temple was built to meet the limitations and the needs of Yahweh's people. What did he say? I will build a house for you. I'm not going to build a house for me, he says. He said, I'm going to build it for you. The temple wasn't for Yahweh. The temple was for us, the people of Yahweh. It emphasized the way of salvation to those who asked his forgiveness and represented the believer's assurance of the grace of Yahweh for their joy and blessing. According to 1 Kings 8:27 and 30. But will Elohim indeed dwell on the earth? Behold, heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain thee. How much less this house which I have built? 1 Kings 8 and 27 says. Solomon knew that this was for the presence, not literally for Yahweh, but it was for Yahweh's people as a meeting place so that they could get their needs met. The temple also symbolized the hearing ear of Yahweh. Yet regard the prayer of your servant and his supplication, O Yahweh my Elohim. Listen to the cry and the prayer which your servant is praying before you today, that your eyes may be open towards this temple night and day, towards the place of which you said, my name shall be there, and that you may hear the prayer which your servant makes towards this place. 1 Kings 8, 28 through 29. It was also a place of refuge for the stranger. Moreover, concerning a foreigner who is not of your people Israel, but has come from a far country for your name's sake, for they will hear of your great name and your strong hand and your outstretched arm. When he comes and prays towards this temple, here in heaven, your dwelling place, and do according to all for which the foreigner calls to you. That's why we face Jerusalem. That all people of the earth may know your name and fear you, as do your people Israel, and that they may know that this temple which I have built is called by your name. 1 Kings 8, 41 through 43. The temple is the house of prayer for all people, where all nations of the earth should fear Yahweh. Even them I will bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be accepted on my altar, for my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations. Isaiah 56 and 7. So if you'll love Yahweh's name, keep his Sabbaths and not pollute them, and hold on to the covenant, then he'll bring you to his house of prayer. For that's what it's to be called, the house of prayer for all nations. When all the work King Solomon had done for the temple of Yahweh was finished, he brought in the things his father David had dedicated, the silver and gold and the furnishings, and he placed them in the treasury of Yahweh's temple. 1 Kings 7:51. What did Yahweh say? I will build a house for you. I have indeed built a magnificent temple for you, Solomon said, a place for you to dwell forever, in 1 Kings 8:13. But unless Yahweh builds a house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless Yahweh watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It is in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for he gives to his beloved sleep. Lo, sons are a heritage from Yahweh, and the fruit of the womb a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the sons of one's youth. Happy is the man who has his quiver full of them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate. That's the Psalms 127. The song that was sung as people went up to worship on the temple. Unless Yahweh builds the house, those who labor in it, those who worship there, it's all vanity. What did Yahweh say? I'll build a house for you. That's my message. Any questions? Well, the cedar has some extreme significance. Termites don't eat it. No, it is a wood, that and cypress, or wood that bugs won't devour. And this has to be an eternal structure. If you're going to overlay it with gold, then the wood is in danger underneath that if animals get to it. But because it's a repellent wood, cedar and cypress, they won't eat it. So it stays good. So it was Yahweh's intention that this lasts forever. Yeah, and we'll go into the reasons why the temple was destroyed later. We're going to be introduced to Herod's temple next week, Yahweh willing. But Caiaphas' house and Ananias' house, according to the Talmud. They were raiding the treasury. It wasn't wrong. In fact, it was righteous to make an avenue for urban dwellers to purchase sacrifice so that they could make the offerings unto Yahweh. Much like we do here when you convert wheat or barley or whatnot with your offering. But what they had done, they were using uneven measures. They were shortchanging the people in their change. And they were stealing from the treasury. And Yahweh says, through his Son, you have made my house a den of thieves. But he also goes on to say that I'm going to fix that. But he was going to do that by fire, by destroying it and rebuilding it. Understand that the true temple of Yahweh never has been destroyed. That's in the heavens. This is the portal down below to mirror that. That's the shadow cast by the real thing. So there has to be that temple because the temple casts a shadow. So we've been doing without a temple long enough. It's on the horizon. Years ago, I met a man that was a Mossad agent, and he showed me some Polaroid pictures. They were pretty worn out, and they were wrapped in a fat rubber band. But he came at the conclusion of one of my meetings when I was teaching on the temple. And he showed me those pictures in one of the temples. In one of the tunnels of all of this cut stone, it's limestone. All numbered and all stored under the temple mount somewhere in Hezekiah's tunnels. And he said, that's the prefabricated temple. Notice it says, you have to prefab it because there can't be a hammer and a chisel upon the mountain. Literally, the construction has to be quiet to show holiness to the site. So, given the right time, we know where the right place is. Given the right time, the temple can be readily built because it's already cut. Has to be made of the same material, limestone, from Solomon's quarries. Yeah, thy will be done. So, in the, when it's time, when the monarchy has been restored, and the man is anointed, he'll start building his temple. Why does he build the temple? Because there has to be a place to abominate. So once that temple is built, we know that that time clock is accelerating. Any more questions or statements? Good. Thank you for coming out. Give the Father praise. Yeah. Amen. Alrighty, I will see you on Sabbath.